Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to our second round of seminars. Today is the first seminar of semester 2 of the School of Landscape Architecture at Lincoln University. Today we're going to start with a special topic with Dr. Maria Ignatieva, who is a landscape architect and an urban ecologist who teaches and researches at the University of Western Australia School of Design. She is currently head of School of Architecture, Landscape Architecture and Urban Design Department. She will be today talking about lawn and ecological and cultural phenomenon. And I want to welcome her for being here with us today, all the way from Perth. Just a quick notes to our listeners. So there's the Q&A section on the top right corner of your screen. You are invited to write your questions as she is presenting, and we will get to them at the end of her presentation. Also, this talk will be recorded, and we will put it on the SOLA's YouTube page in the next coming days. So that's all the admin on my part. And right now I would like to invite Maria to turn on her microphone and to take the lead. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure for me to give this talk and share with you my research. It's actually, I've been in New Zealand for 10 years, and also I was teaching in School of Design, so it will be very nice also to share with you some of my research from Christchurch. Also, I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Russia, but already for 25 years I lived and worked in New Zealand, in the United States, in Sweden, in Uppsala, and finally I just moved 2 years ago to Australia, to Western Australia. And all these years I was involved in many research related to urban ecology, urban biotopes, and this particular passion on lawn actually was quite long. And I would like to start my presentation and talk about different aspects of lawn as ecological and cultural phenomenon. Sorry, I have difficulties to move. It's a technical problem. We are. So probably you're not aware, but actually lawns are covering 50 to 70% of urban green space worldwide. And probably usually I ask people to recognize the slides I put together, and if you can tell me where are these slides were taken. But unfortunately, it will be very difficult to say, but in this case, the slides from Perth, from St. Petersburg, and from Stockholm in Sweden. And actually, most people view lawns as a compulsory element of everyday urban life. Again, if I can ask you where I have done the slides, it will be very, very difficult to say. This is in Japan, in Chatswood, England, in Holland, and also in one of the Chinese parks. And now I would like to give you a definition of lawns. Probably not all of you know, and actually it's very European phenomenon, and it's man-made plant community. And one of the essential point of lawns is regularly mown grass species, especially created for different human needs. And there are some of the spontaneously occurred herbaceous plants called forbs. And the main point is create all this uniform phenomenon, a turf or sod is another definition of that. And it's a very kind of closely covered grasses surface and intervene with the all the roots, stolons, and also it's actually all these grasses are related in symbiotic relationship in soil and fauna. And it's a special construction technique, preparing soil, seed, and you can see the quite a big horizon of the humus in one of the Swedish lawns. And one of the crucial points of this plant communities as regular management. Without management, there will be not lawn. It's a mowing, fertilizing, watering, and aeration. And I show you also the for comparison how the lawns in Perth are looking. It's all sitting on sand, and it's very artificially created plant community. And also, lawns are 100% of human invention. And its conceptual, physical, and ecological sense are purely designed for decoration and pleasure. And there are some of the nearest relatives to lawns. It's natural grasslands, all located in Europe, it's a steppe, or North American prairie. Also, some of the grazed environment around the world, especially in Europe, or it's also part of the Argentinian pampas and also South African velds. And the main difference between the lawn and their next relatives, meadows or steppe, is a very, very big density of shoots per square meters. It's 10,000 compared to 3,000. And also the differences of lawns are that they have a very simple layer, and also this kind of very, very big density of plants. And it's also very low biodiversity compared to meadows. It's only we're using usually in lawns 1, 2, if it's a very special manicured ornamental lawn, or 5 to 10 species in other types of lawns. Compared to meadow, when you can find 250 up to 300 species. And the origin of lawn, when actually lawn originated and what time, actually nobody knows, but the recent research believed that it's actually first time appeared in northwest part of Europe, in southern Britain and northern France, because it's there is a special climate there with very mild winters and warm, humid summers. And this created very favorable conditions for growing all lawn grasses. I'm not going to give you all the Latin names, but believe me, it's all grasses we actually also use quite widely in temperate part of New Zealand as well. And also lawns provided a very big range of ecosystem services. It's cooling, carbon sequestration benefit, regulation of water cycle, and also irrigated lawns provide a special habitat for some fauna species. It's of course recreation activities, probably the biggest ecosystem services. And you know, as according to the traditional ecosystem services divisions, they have a regulating, supporting, cultural, aesthetical, and other purposes. On the other hand, it's also provided disservices, they call in geography, especially during hot and dry summers. In places like Perth, for example, there's no watering. It's can be dust pollution, and it's actually use of water much more than it was possible to use, and especially with absence of water. It's loss of native habitats because we substituted with this artificial one. And another one is the ecological homogenization. So that's why we couldn't recognize any of the slides at the beginning, because they started to be very similar, not only visual, but also ecologically. And this is just illustrations about all these ecosystem services. All this pure green grass is actually very important for reducing runoff or carbon sequestration. And also you can see it, one of the slides is actually kangaroo who are using lawns as a free dining room in many places in Australia. Also, I would like to share with you some of my research about the origin of lawn as a word, because in our latest research, I'm going to talk a bit later, I had interesting research on origin in different countries. And actually lawn in some recent research, they believe that it actually came from Old French laund. Also, another view, the lawn is corrupted of the Middle English word launde. And actually lawn as a word only appeared quite late in English dictionaries in 1548. It's actually 16th century, and it's mean open space between trees. And there's still debate about the etymologies among the garden history researchers. But actually, when the first true lawn with all this one dominated two dominated grasses appeared, probably it's medieval time, and before the word lawn was known, they used the word pratum. It actually was simply cut turf or sod from the meadows or grassland pasture lands, and they used in monasteries and castle gardens, and they were very, very small in size. And they, one of the first descriptions on how to do lawns by using this technique was described in Albertus Magnus' book in 1260. And he talked about the creating the area of the roots of weeds by digging them up, then applying boiling water, and finally placing turf sods cut from the good grassy meadows. So this actually was ready turf, then they cut, and then they rammed that with wooden mallets, encouraged by this way to grow special only grasses. And it's supposed to like create special surfaces resembling in fine textured cloth. There are two types of grasses sward according to our observation of different images in European galleries and engraves. It was a flower-rich lawn because remember, all the medieval gardens should be a paradise. It means they encouraged to have all these meadows as a symbol of one of the symbols of paradise, and also grass-dominated lawn, but they are very small in size. It was mostly like a benches on when you can grassy benches when you can sit, and you can see in all these two images. Also, I would like to mention that all these short grass areas in European gardens were created exclusively as a pleasure ground. It was nothing just to use it for other purposes. And also appearance of the lawn and the bigger amounts was also connected to the safety and political stability. Then people actually can have this pleasure, and it was free of all these wars. And of course, very essential part of development of lawns in the history, it was formal 17th century gardens, and it was created a special type called parterre, and also element the green carpet tapis vert. And for example, in the above image from Vaux-le-Vicomte, you can see special grassy type of parterre called English parterre, because they use a lot of lawns, and the lawns in England was as a special kind of dream of all gardeners in their formal gardens. So this English type of the parterres was very time and money consuming element. It was a use of special seed mixtures which were collected in the different from different turfs from pasture lands. And of course, it was very much a labor-intensive element, and it's required intensive maintenance, and it was a whole army of gardeners who took care of the parterres and lawns in such gardens. And of course, English landscape park with all this intent to mimic nature, lush, rich greenness without flowers surfaces, and it was a special turning point in developing on all these grassy environments in parks and gardens. And for example, the position of the house mentioned in English gardens required the special surfaces around that who was actually mown quite frequently. And also another part was beyond haha, the special created ditch, and the other part there should be like a visually connected, and it was grass. So this kind of grass type was more relaxed compared to all this very intensively managed lawns next to the houses. So, and it's also even the third part, I didn't include the slide, it was a special grass area created inside the woods. They cut the wood and created special vistas, and also used the hay from the pastures to create all this kind of grassy vistas. And of course, 19th century was very much a turning point in developing of the truly lawn as we know them today. And one of the classical definitions of lawn was given by John Lawden, and it was related to the, first of all, shortcut and grass-dominated environment. And in 19th century gardenesque, lawn started to be a very important element. And it was very much decorative. It was used for recreation, picnics, social events, and also as a special display, special canvas when all these plants as objects of art can be displayed. So this is kind of ideology of lawns in gardener style was very important. And from this point, we have all these words like carpet, canvas, green velvet related to lawn. And all this canvas was used where we can display trees, shrubs, sculpture, unusual exotic flowers. And it should be like a painted and demonstrate the most in the most effective way. And it's again, green grass was this very important part of this park canvas. And here we have this turning point towards the idealized lawn aesthetics. Evenly mown, one grass species or two grass species, and no weeds, no leaves. And it was actually very much in together with going together with the ideology of gardener style, domination of art over nature, one of the absolute and gardening environment, and introduction of the lawnmower in the 1830s was very important demarcated line and the beginning of the era of the industrial lawn or mass productive lawn. And here I show you some of the classical gardenesque flower beds that were displayed on lawns, one in Malaysia and another one in Germany. And going to our modern era on 20th century, all lawns, of course, developed in the private sector, in parks and gardens, in all our different elements of green areas, green spaces. And they have always very similar social and political meaning. It's a very pastoral, natural landscape. I put it in bracket because lawn is really not really natural landscape in the places in colonial landscape, for example, and tidy display or carpet in private garden. And the private gardens of 20th century, and there's two examples here, one from Sweden and one from Perth in Australia. It's a very important part of suburban landscape, place for the leisure activity, and always will be the matter of prestige. The better lawn you have, the better garden you have, the more prestige you have in the neighborhood. And I would like to say a couple of words of colonial lawns because I had a privilege to research lawns in New Zealand and now in Australia. Colonial lawns were introduced in all colonial cultures, not only Australia and New Zealand, but all other colonies. The special heritage of England, together with other garden elements, playing architectural archetypes. And it was very difficult to find the right grasses species that could withdraw the heat and drought of cold. Different soils, I just showed you, remember the image of sand in Perth or many other places in Australia. And it was much more efforts to establish and manage, first of all, finding all these appropriate grasses. And was always big contrast to surrounding native biomes, native plant communities. I put for you only two examples. One of the tussock grasses in surrounding of in Banks Peninsula in New Zealand, and also the biomes of the Banksia forest and grass tree in Perth, when I'm living right now, and the contrast of what were created these lawns and how it looks like. So in the United States, always lawn was a a symbol of prestige even more in many other countries. And the most literature about lawn and the disservices of lawn at the moment came from United States. As we thought the US, especially front lawn, became the most ecological manifestation element of American lifestyle. So it's actually associated with American lifestyles. Big house, big driveway, big lawn, manicured lawn. And the Michael Pollan called lawn in America nature under totalitarian rule and control. Also, since I'm now in Perth, I also would like to share you some of the vision and recent research on lawns when we started recently. Since it's very dry Mediterranean climate with long, dry and hot summers, where grasses cannot really grow very well, and especially sandy soils, lawn always will valued as a social and moral indicator, much more than in other places. And it was a special symbol of civilization. So civilization, English civilization, European civilization, as a contrast to the indigenous landscape and culture. And it was associated with wilderness, running wilderness. And it was very much use of water and was only irrigated lawn. Otherwise, lawn cannot physically survive in this environment. And it's interesting data then in 1970s, gardens use over half of the all Perth water use. And this is an example of Perth lawns. And right now it's a latest phenomenon. Plastic lawns take of nature and using a substitute. Again, that's actually very interesting social nostalgia about all this even green grass. And I would like to also let you know then when I survey all these biotopes around the globe, it's very easy to see then in all European countries will be always domination of native species. It's actually well enough because it's actually a country, with some exceptions, of course, in southern and the Rhine environment in European countries. And domination of non-native plants in all other places around the globe. And this is the images that I collected from around the world with Bolivia, Brazil, Christchurch, and Perth. They see we have a very similar homogeneous green grass landscape. And especially for you, I put this our old research and say that in New Zealand, especially in South Island, with the all quite temperate climate, actually there are some species that can colonize, native species that can colonize lawns, as Hydrocotyl or Pratia ungulata, and it's an example from Christchurch Bowling Green. Even Hydrocotyl is proclaimed as a very bad weed, and there is a special herbicide against the Hydrocotyl. And there are only 3 to 4 species of native plants that actually can survive, but there are, and it is comparison to lawns in Perth. Then we don't have any one native plant even trying to colonize this lawn. It's very interesting for me, but we have a lot of weeds from South Africa, because it's a kind of the same part of Gondwana land. That's why all these plants from South Africa are really doing well in Perth. But probably, like I would tell you a couple of words about the searching for alternative lawns. It's not really easy to find it here because it's a very ancient land with no disturbances before. So there are not too many plants who can compete with all these lawn species than used in recent turf industry. And it will be a different strategy of searching of alternative lawns and their understanding actually and sustainable lawns in places like Australia. And it's just an example of what plants are used for turf industry in Western Australia. They're all from Africa, and from Asia originally. And now I would like to share with you my research in Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, I've been there almost 8 years, and we had a very big project for 4 years from Swedish Research Foundation Formas. It was actually big research, 11 people involved. And you asked me, why do research loans in Swedish cities? So they all have a native species, they have actually lawns growing really well. But it was actually a request from local municipalities because of very expensive maintenance, especially mowing. And also there are controversial issues about lawns are already known as a homogenization of urban landscapes and low biodiversity, and I know biodiversity issues is a very hot topic at the moment. Also high water consumption, incorrect use of fertilizers, also air pollution that's coming from actually mowing of using of the modern mowers, and production of the volatile organic compound that could affect the environment and human health. Also, climate change and environmental movements search for different sustainable landscape design. So they were the reason behind of this project. And it was 11 scientists from different backgrounds, and also it was a included stakeholders, government management, landscape architects. We use also the part of our research in golfs as example of the very intensively managed lawns. Also nursery people, also landscape architects, horticulturists, many others. So this is actually example on classical transdisciplinary research. Then only not using the interdisciplinary collaboration, but heavily involved stakeholder in your research activity. So we had a biodiversity environmental impact, social and cultural historical, planning and design, and management intensity was the a major driven force of our all research and all our research activity. We had 3 Swedish cities, Uppsala, Gothenburg, and Malmö. Sweden is a very long country, so we use all these 3 cities also to have a difference, slightly difference in climatic peculiarities, and all this transdisciplinary work. So we also try to include historical and etymological knowledge in this research and show how actually it's important to find the truth and find the confirmation of our hypothesis about lawn. For example, I'm not going to give you more about that. I can refer to the special publication on history of Swedish lawns, where we also talk about the origin of word when we use in Swedish language. Actually, not interesting enough, gräsmatta, it's a special word, meaning green carpet, in Swedish appeared only in the 19th century. And we had a really long search of the very much origin and how it was used. And what is interesting, so the lawn idea then introduced from England and France, Europe in January. So it's actually very commonly in Europe. Had a very much good soil to succeed. And in the mid of 19th century was a special word introduced in the time of the democratization of Swedish society, and also this notion of equality and accessibility of urban public space. So they created even special word, gräsmatta, to dedicate this particular lawn phenomenon. And we did the history of Swedish lawn. This was actually very good prerequisites for developing in lawns. It's they use the pastures on forests and forest margins and some natural grasslands since the Bronze Age 4,000 years ago. And the soils are very much applicable for creating all these grass species, and they use the cut turf in their green roofs, and of course in all historical parks and gardens. And we had a special timeline and different periods. Then lawn was developed, and all these interesting periods in lawn development. And also, since we research only publicly accessible lawns, because of the very special land use in specific of the Swedish model, and it's a socialism with the special capitalistic characteristics. And especially in the early 20th century, it was democratization, industrialization, creating a very strong welfare state. So especially in the 1940s, public housing strong supported by the government, and it was a special call to improve living standards, bring light, air, using all these special houses then in flats to each person. And it's created by such lawns and shrubs and trees were special idea of saving nature or introducing nature into the city. So it was a two major typology of the housing and areas around that, in the Folkham era or special like people's era, and then multifamily houses from Million Program era in 1960s, 1970s. So our results were very shocking to us. You know, we never thought how much lawns cover areas in Sweden. So in all multifamily resident houses is cover more than 26% total cover. And in urban green areas or urban green spaces, over half of the areas covered by lawns. And we also found then if we combine all these lawns and compared to the other types of land cover, lawns covered 0.6% of the terrestrial surface. This is huge. And also it's incredible municipal management cost of lawns in all Swedish cities is around, you see, like over 910 million USD dollars. And during 50 years, lawn area in Sweden almost doubled, and is always continuously managed and created all the special environment. In our carbon sequestration, carbon footprint of urban lawns, we of course confirmed then, yes, lawns do the job to be green, produce all this green mass. And we confirmed the hypothesis that lawn in general have a positive effect on the urban environment compared to hard surfaces, for example, through the carbon sequestration in soil. However, when we compare how much more in irrigation, fertilization is put inside that, it's all require fossil fuel energy, incredible labor cost, and cost of greenhouse gas emission. So, and our main conclusion was then reduce mowing frequency, and using electric machines can reduce the carbon footprint, negative ecosystem services of carbon footprint of lawns. As for biodiversity, we also find that yes, the meadow-like lawn or high grass lawns have a higher biodiversity compared to the conventional lawns, because plants physically cannot grow. Even these plants like clover, for example, then spontaneously appeared in Swedish lawns. And the same with pollinator and also earthworms when we're researching this project. And what we found also interesting, we confirmed all this homogeneous ecologically similarity research. It was demonstrated by very low beta diversity, both in riches and species abundance. This means we have a very similar lawns and actually similar to, for example, what they found in the United States. And we had a very interesting social research who demonstrated then, yes, people like lawns because they see them all around from the very beginning of their lives, next to the school, university, and the cities. It's a very important place for outdoor activity. We found this place in racing, picnicking, walking, socializing, even actually, as you can imagine, use of lawn is limited only for our season, summer season, early spring, late spring, and early autumn. But what is interesting to us, when we found that people want to see not just monotonous lawns, but a variety of outdoor spaces, then can provide the conditions for different senses, sound, smell, touch, and visual variety. And then we ask people about the different alternatives when developed. It's called grass-free lawn. It's mean only low-growing flowering plants, or like middle options, meadow with perennials and the cut grass around, and pictorial annual meadows. We had a very much range of opinions, but it was a growing number of people who is aware of the environmental problem and don't mind to have alternatives to lawns. But when the municipalities with whom we're working, they said we don't have any other variety because we are sure that people don't like to have this messy meadows. But actually, research showing that it's now the switching turn of the people's opinion towards to the more environmental design. So, and we're trying to find the new approaches, and there is definitely needs in changing of existing paradigms of ideal lawn strategy. And we have two strategies in our research. First is a retrofit of existing lawns to different typology of more sustainable lawns. And another one to create the new generation of lawns. And here are these examples of design solution for Gothenburg of existing typology of these two areas when researched, how we can turn to the more sustainable environment. And here, our new invention, we were inspired first of all by the medieval time with all this meadow-like environment inside the gardens, and also from England, our colleague from one of the universities working with these grass-free lawns in England, and he actually used on all these native and exotic plants, and many of them actually came from New Zealand. But we were going to more paradigm inspired from nature, existing nature. It's called Focus Amenus. And our attention was appreciations of nature as it is. It's mean meager Northern European nature, not so rich compared to other places. And all it was inspiration from Swedish history. And you know, I already showed you that we use a lot of meadows and cut turf already in the history, and all experimentation and design proposal with use of low-growing plants. And we created a very big tapestry lawn in front of, as you can see here, in front of the Rector House and our new building. And it was help from our students, from the industry, of the nurses who grow in native plants. We put in 3 days 7,400 planters to establish this free tapestry in experimental lawn. And just the same year, it already looked like this. And now it's growing and covering, and actually you can work on that and enjoy. And it's actually now it's a part of the very important display, ecological display in the middle of the campus. And we also created the series of real meadows, also for the seed mixtures, different technique, and how it looks in the second year of that development. And we also create a special prefabricated, grown in nursery, lawn with native species, and we created even special bench that can be used for sitting and picnicking in one of the next to the one of the houses in the campus. And our lawn project experimental science received the special Green Flag Award from United Kingdom for alternative meadow plantings in Ultuna campus. And if you're interested to learn about what we have done, there is the site and also electronic copy of this book when I put together as results of our research. It's manual of the alternative lawn in Sweden from theory to practice. It's available in electronic format. I can send it to you personally, or you can find it from our lawn website of this research project. And also it was very much inspiration for public in public parks. One of the municipality in Stockholm, in Sundbyberg, asked us, and we created all this also alternative meadows and lawns, and actually it was very popular among the people. You can see the differences of the traditional conventional lawn and grass-free and meadow lawn. And very end, I would like to say you about New Zealand lawn, because it was actually quite a big part of my life, and I really miss New Zealand. I hope to visit it one day. So we work for 4 years in the project on low impact development in New Zealand, and put together the manual how to put nature to our neighborhood. And there is a special chapter about alternative lawns and actually species from native flora that can be used as substitution of the classical lawn. And we created the demonstration gardens, small demonstration gardens in Christchurch Botanical Garden, when where we try all these different species. You know, unfortunately, these demonstration sites were removed during the construction of new information center. And now you can see it's only on slides. But again, if you are interested, I can answer your questions, and I can also navigate you to the certain publications about New Zealand lawn. And there are a lot of potentials in flora, much more I can tell you compared to, for example, Perth, that can be used, and also the special management technique to make lawn more sustainable. On this note, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you, Nami. And I'm just looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Oops. There's an echo in. I'm going to ask you to lower the volume of your computer. Okay, I'm going to try again. I can hear my voice.
Is it better?
No. Hold on. So we have a question for you here from Anne Cunningham. Hi, Maria. It's in I can't read it. Okay. All right, so in one of my PhD cases, the z-axis for a lawn is an interesting concern. From your research, have you looked at the z-axis example where lawns originally conceived as flat spaces? Can you unmute your microphone? Sorry.
Okay, probably maybe you can explain what is all about, because I didn't come across of that. So what do you mean by this Z lawns?
Okay, we're gonna wait for a reply on her end. I have a technical question for you. So when you say that it has proven in your research that actually lawns help and promote carbon sequestration, when we talk about carbon sequestration, one of the main issues that we have to also look into is how deep the roots system goes of a plant, so that carbon sequestration is relevant or efficient. So usually turf or lawn, the root system of it is quite shallow. Did that come up anywhere in your research?
It's actually all depend on the place, because now we did this research, then I will show you the examples from Sweden. And Sweden has different soil. All this natural soil and the created soil can have a very big humus horizon. So actually, the roots can be growing quite deep, compared to, for example, for many colonial cultures. That's actually a very artificial element, as you know. It doesn't exist in the nature. at all. So that's why it's dependent. And for example, in places like Perth, then you actually have a sand and the turf on top of them. This is not really a matter. It doesn't really contribute to. I mean, it's much more maintenance than negated all this carbon sequestration. So that's why usually when it's not really a big deal of the ecosystem services in countries, in colonial countries, especially in different climates. So yeah, you are quite right. It's depend on the root system, but in our case, this root system not really deep. So. So usually we never use it as the special ecosystem services here, carbon sequestration. It does, but it actually always compared to it also depends what you compare with. If you compare with the hard surfaces, yes, of course,
yes,
something else is available. But if you can compare to the other, and again, it's so foreign to the native ecosystems, especially New Zealand, Australia, many other countries, also tropics, that's actually very difficult to compare. Yeah. And remember, all this comparison, the positives came from Europe or America, and usually from the temperate climate.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Another question, and I don't know how relevant it is, but I couldn't help but hear in your talk the importance of the evolution of lawn in the history of landscape architecture and gardens, and how they became what they are today. And today, with this raise in consciousness about climate change, and how having just strict lawns or monocultures is more harmful than doing any benefits in terms of ecosystem and biodiversities and all that stuff. Were you able to compare or look at ground cover versus turf? Because ground cover usually doesn't need the maintenance that turf and lawn requires in terms of mowing and using all these fossil fuel energy to maintain them.
Yes, of course, but it's again, when we're doing alternative examples, all depend on the place. It's actually very local oriented. So for example, the alternative solutions, I call it not even alternative lawns, alternative solutions, because for example, in Perth, we can't do alternative lawns. It's very difficult. It will be a different typology, and we call it alternative lawns because it's very difficult to find the other word for that. It's actually, here we have a strategy of doing more special management, because still it's very difficult to rid of lawn. But you're quite right. Yes, ground covers can be alternative, and they're all the range of ground covers. And you know what I showed you in the very end is your ground cover plants. They are ground covers.
Okay.
And there are special range of them from New Zealand flora, especially. New Zealand flora is actually rich. And what is different, for example, from New Zealand to Australia, some of the plants naturally appeared on lawns. It means we already have inspiration from nature, if you wish. They already kind of try to compete with existing grasses and give us a clue what we can use. Like here in many places in Australia, they can't, because the nature itself, the nature of native plants are different. So they physically can compete because of their different strategy. And they only produce stolon. So that's why to find the substitute here is much more difficult. And sometimes you need to irrigate them in any case. So that's why the twist now towards to the low-growing actually shrubs. But you cannot use it. You can work on the low-growing shrubs, So this is the tricky one to find, because this is the lawn major point for lawn is using for recreation.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's also about planning. Like for example, we found in our research, we have like lawn is a main element of open space design. In all our application in design, we have trees, shrubs, and lawn, grass. But some places are not used. People not use it. When the places when you don't use, you can actually create different typology of the plantings. Low-growing plantings, not where people not necessarily to need to go and to sit. Of course, in the places that people have in recreation, is another story, and this will be a very difficult way to do.
So
questions about the ground covers.
Yes. So for the other question, so in your research, has the topography of lawns been considered? So that's what she meant by the Z-axis. So did people flatten land to make lawns?
Yeah, but it's of course if it is for recreation, yeah, whenever you touch it, because all our lawns are flat, and then topography in Swedish, some lawns are using is like artificially created topology. They have like a capability brown landscape in some of the neighborhoods, but in our research, most of the lawns were very flat or is slightly elevated, so it wasn't the issue. We didn't actually include it as a special research parameters. I had one of the students from China. She did the Chinese lawns as a PhD, used the Xi'an city as a case study. It's in the middle of China, with very dry temperate climate, with winters and summers, dry summers and wet winters. So one of the parameters was topography, but actually was not really influenced, for example, on biodiversity, what we were looking for. But there's an interesting question now. All these slopes, especially along the roads, are used as a special coverage of the native plantings, like woody meadows, we call it here, or some of the low shrub plantings, or just meadows in Europe. So all these elevated areas trying to use for the alternative plantings, like meadows, pictorial meadows, or grass-free lawns, or other alternative solutions, if it's a real elevated environment. Hope I answer, but in our research, no, because it was mostly flat case.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. One last question. So the evolution of lawns made it that people today like lawns. Like you said, people like green grasses, and it's a social space. It attracts people, socially speaking. Will your research be going in a direction of trying to understand the social perception of people and how they look at these spaces with all of this discourse of climate change?
Yeah, actually, it will be the next step, because especially now in pandemic and after pandemic time, we try to understand there are also attachment of lawns, and the people, I mean, I can see it here, even they use like half of their water for watering lawn, but they do, and it exists. And and now we have a rain season, so more or less rain season, so it's very green. So it will be continue, and I don't think if it will be completely out of water, it can stop, and it will be natural, like spontaneous vegetation coming along. But yes, it's actually very important to research further on the social component. Unfortunately, I had no time. We had a special article actually on social results from our research in Sweden. So you can refer, and then in this manual, actually, they're all included. So you can see that more in details, because it was actually very big research. It's not really easy. It's it's the range of people, range of opinion, and also it depends how you do research and what season.
Yes,
and the seasonality, and also a part of the day. For example, in Sweden, actually lawns can be used during summer 24/7 because there's no nights during summer. But in winter, it's all covered by snow, or it's very dark. You should not really living outside at all. Yes. So they're all very much depending on the country as well. So that's why actually we started now the big research, comparison research from 6 countries, different climates, different cultural conditions, economic, political. So, and we try to compare all these lawns, and one of the components is social perception. So it's biodiversity, social perception, and also another parameters we look at actually the similar like phenomenon, but in different countries, and social part is one of the crucial. But again, there are not too many researchers. Most of them, as I said, came from United States. But again, it's more about biodiversity and about overall kind of social, cultural, historical perceptions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Maria. I think this is it when it comes to the question. I want to thank you again for joining us all the way from Perth. And thank you all for attending, and see you again next week.
Thank you.